The Temple Mount in Jerusalem has never been excavated, but an illegal construction project 20 years ago opened the door to some major discoveries.
It seems like a very confusing visual image. Where are we right now?
We're now standing below the Western Wall Plaza, a huge project revealing ancient Jerusalem.
The Temple Mount in Jerusalem stands as one of humanity's most sacred and contested sites. For thousands of years, it has been revered by Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, each tradition holding deep spiritual connections to this ancient plateau of limestone and faith. But what lies beneath its weathered stones has remained largely a mystery, sealed away by religious sensitivity and political complexity. Until now, recent discoveries emerging from beneath the Temple Mount have begun to rewrite our understanding of ancient Jerusalem, revealing a hidden world that has waited in darkness for nearly 3 millennia. What scientists have uncovered doesn't just confirm ancient texts. It challenges everything we thought we knew about the scale, sophistication, and sacred purpose of what once stood here.
That holds thousands of years of biblical and prophetic significance.
This is not speculation. This is evidence pulled from the earth itself. Jerusalem's old city rises from the Judean hills like a crown of ancient stone. Yet within this crown, one place stands above all others, not in physical height, but in spiritual magnitude. The Temple Mount, known in Hebrew as Har Habayit and in Arabic as Haram al-Sharif, is perhaps the most religiously charged piece of real estate on planet Earth. For Jews, this is the holiest site in existence, the place where Abraham is believed to have nearly sacrificed Isaac, where Jacob dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven, and where King Solomon built the first temple nearly 3,000 years ago. According to tradition, this temple housed the Ark of the Covenant within its innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, where God's presence, the Shekinah, was said to dwell between golden cherubim. After the Babylonians destroyed this temple in 586 BCE, the Jewish people rebuilt it under Persian permission, creating the Second Temple. This structure stood for nearly 6 centuries until Roman legions under Titus razed it in 70 CE, leaving only the Western Wall that still stands today. For Muslims, the Temple Mount is Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, the third holiest site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. The magnificent Dome of the Rock, built in 691 CE, marks the spot from which the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven during the night journey. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, completed shortly after, stands as one of Islam's most venerated houses of worship. For Christians, the Temple Mount holds profound significance as the backdrop to Jesus' ministry. Here, according to the Gospels, Jesus was presented as an infant. Here he debated with religious scholars as a boy, and here he overturned the tables of money changers, declaring that God's house should be a place of prayer, not commerce. The temple's destruction, prophesied by Jesus himself, became a pivotal moment in early Christian theology. But beyond these visible layers of faith and history lies something deeper. Throughout its existence, empire after empire left their mark on this mount. The Persians, who allowed the Jews to return and rebuild. The Greeks under Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple, sparking the Maccabean revolt. The Romans, who expanded Herod's magnificent renovation before destroying it entirely. The Byzantines, who built churches across Jerusalem. The Umayyad Caliphate that erected the iconic Golden Dome. The Crusaders, who briefly claimed it for Christianity. The Mamluks, the Ottomans, the British Mandate, and finally the modern state of Israel, each power reshaping, rebuilding, and redefining this sacred space. Yet through every conquest and reconstruction, one belief persisted across all traditions, that this place was not merely holy, but fundamentally different from all other places on earth. A point where heaven and earth met, where the divine touched the mortal world, where prayers ascended more directly to God. And despite all we know about the Temple Mount surface, what lies beneath remains largely unexplored, protected by layers of religious prohibition and political tension, until a series of unexpected events in the late 1990s began to change everything. The forbidden ground, why we've never dug here. At most archaeological sites around the world, the process is straightforward. Researchers obtain permits, assemble teams, secure funding, and begin careful excavation. Layer by layer, they reveal the past. But the Temple Mount is unlike any other archaeological site on Earth. Digging here isn't just technically complex or expensive. It's potentially catastrophic. The reasons are both spiritual and political, and they run deeper than most outsiders realize. For observant Jews, there's a profound religious prohibition against even walking on certain parts of the Temple Mount. Why? Because the exact location of the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary where God's presence dwelt, is unknown. Jewish law forbids entry into this space except for the high priest on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Since the temple's destruction 2,000 years ago and the subsequent loss of the required ritual purity, no one can enter that space. The problem is, no one knows exactly where it was. Orthodox rabbis have therefore declared the entire Temple Mount platform potentially forbidden ground. Even speaking of excavation is spiritually troubling to many religious Jews. For Muslims, the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, contains the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Islamic Waqf, a Jordanian religious trust, has maintained administrative control over the site since 1967, even though Israel controls security and access to the mount itself. This arrangement is extraordinarily delicate. Any perceived threat to Muslim sovereignty over the site can trigger riots, diplomatic crises, and even war. The Waqf has historically opposed any archaeological work on the mount, viewing it as a pretext for undermining Muslim claims to the site. The political ramifications extend far beyond Jerusalem. The Temple Mount sits at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Any action perceived as changing the status quo can ignite violence not just locally, but across the entire Middle East and beyond. As one Israeli archaeologist put it, digging at the Temple Mount isn't just about uncovering history, it's about war and peace. This impossible situation has created what scholars call an archaeological black hole at the very center of biblical history. While we can excavate ancient Egyptian tombs, Greek temples, and Roman forums, the single most important religious site in the Western tradition remains off limits. But history has a way of revealing its secrets even when we're not looking for them. And in the late 1990s, an unauthorized construction project would accidentally open a window into the Temple Mount's hidden past. The accidental discovery when politics opened the past. In 1999, the Islamic Waqf began a massive construction project to create an underground mosque in a space known as Solomon's Stables, an ancient vaulted structure beneath the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount. The project involved moving hundreds of truckloads of earth and debris to expand the underground space. Israeli authorities, already in a delicate position, were not informed in advance and had no ability to supervise or document what was happening. From an archaeological perspective, it was a disaster. Potentially thousands of years of stratified history, the very thing archaeologists painstakingly document, was being torn up by bulldozers and dumped without any scientific recording. Ancient pottery, stones, metal objects, everything mixed together and hauled away to the Kidron Valley, a ravine just outside Jerusalem's old city walls. For most people, that soil would have simply disappeared, lost to history. But a group of Israeli archaeologists saw something else, an unprecedented opportunity. While they couldn't excavate the Temple Mount itself, they could examine what had been removed from it. In 2004, archaeologists Jotter, Gabriel Barkay and Zaki Douera launched what would become one of the most unusual archaeological projects in modern history, the Temple Mount Sifting Project. They transported the discarded earth to Emek Surim National Park in Jerusalem and began the painstaking process of manually sifting through every bucket of dirt, piece by piece. The project was unique not just in its method but in its scale. Volunteers from around the world, from schoolchildren to archaeologists, joined the effort. Over the following years, they would sift through hundreds of tons of soil, examining every fragment, every shard, every tiny object that emerged from the sieve. What they found was staggering. More than 500,000 artifacts emerged from that garbage, soil spanning over 3,000 years of human history, coins from the time of Herod the Great, arrowheads from the Crusader period, jewelry from the Islamic era, gaming pieces from the Roman occupation, fragments of mosaic glass from the Second Temple period. But it was the sheer volume of artifacts from the First Temple period, roughly 1000 to 586 BCE, that stunned researchers for decades. Some scholars had argued that the First Temple was more legend than history, that the biblical accounts were exaggerated or entirely fabricated. The archaeological record from that period in Jerusalem had been frustratingly sparse. The Sifting Project changed that calculation. Hundreds of artifacts emerged that could only be explained by the existence of a major religious and administrative center during that period. And the most compelling discoveries were yet to come. Voices from the past, the bulla that spoke names. Among the most remarkable finds were tiny clay objects called bulli, seal impressions used in ancient times to secure and authenticate documents. When an official document was written on papyrus and rolled up, a string would be tied around it and clay pressed over the string. While the clay was still soft, a seal would be pressed into it, leaving an impression. Once dried, the bulla served as both a fastener and a proof of authenticity, ancient tamper, evident packaging for official correspondence. Dozens of these bulli emerged from the sifted soil, and when researchers examined them under magnification, ancient Hebrew inscriptions came into focus. These weren't just random names. They were names of real people, some of whom appear in biblical texts. One bulla bore the name Eliyahu, son of Immer. Scholars immediately recognized the significance. In the book of Jeremiah, Immer is identified as a priestly family that served in the first temple. The biblical text mentions Pashur, son of Immer the priest, who was chief officer in the house of the Lord. Here, in a tiny piece of fired clay, was physical evidence of that priestly family. Not proof of specific biblical events, but proof that the names, the administrative structure, and the priestly lineages described in ancient texts were real. Other bulli followed, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Some bore symbols associated with temple service, stylized pomegranates, ritual vessels, even tiny depictions of temple architecture. Others contained administrative titles or references to positions that aligned eerily well with the organizational structure described in biblical texts like Chronicles and Kings. What made these discoveries so compelling wasn't any single bulla, but the pattern they revealed. These weren't isolated artifacts. They represented a sophisticated bureaucratic system, the kind that could only exist in a functioning, centralized religious and administrative complex, the kind that would be necessary to run a major temple. Then came artifacts even more directly tied to temple worship. A small bronze shovel, of the type used to remove ashes from sacrificial altars, still bore the blackened residue of ancient incense. Fragments of stone vessels carved from limestone, the material required for ritual purity according to Jewish law, because stone vessels could not become ritually impure. Pieces of decorated pottery that matched descriptions of vessels used in temple service. Perhaps most poignant were personal items that seemed to have been lost during moments of crisis: jewelry, coins, small religious amulets. These weren't part of any official repository. They were the belongings of ordinary people who had come to worship at the temple and, in moments of panic or flight, had lost them forever. Until now, beneath the surface, modern technology reveals ancient secrets. While the Sifting Project continued to yield remarkable finds, another line of investigation was quietly proceeding, using 21st century technology to peer beneath the Temple Mount without disturbing its surface. Between 2021 and 2024, a team of researchers began systematically analyzing the areas immediately surrounding the Temple Mount platform, particularly near the western wall and the southern wall, areas where some limited archaeological work was legally permitted. They brought cutting-edge ground-penetrating radar, the same technology used to discover hidden chambers in Egypt's pyramids, and began scanning beneath the bedrock. Almost immediately, the radar detected anomalies. In several locations, the scans revealed voids where solid rock should be empty spaces, rooms, corridors, all buried beneath centuries of construction and collapse. But were these natural erosion, or something deliberately made? To verify what they were seeing, the team did something brilliant. They retrieved British survey maps from the early 1900s, created during the final years of Ottoman rule, when British military engineers like Charles Warren had been allowed brief access to explore parts of Jerusalem's underground. Warren had created detailed maps of some of the tunnels and spaces he'd found, but his work had been cut short when authorities closed access. When researchers overlaid the modern radar data with Warren's century-old maps, they found something extraordinary. They matched. The same corridors, the same voids, the same blocked passages. Warren hadn't been wrong or exaggerating. He'd simply been documenting what was really there, and now modern technology was confirming it. The team knew they couldn't excavate directly beneath the Temple Mount itself, but the western wall tunnels, running along the western side of the mount, were already in the process of careful archaeological excavation. As workers cleared debris from ancient Herodian-era construction, they uncovered something unexpected: a partially buried staircase, carved directly into the limestone bedrock, leading downward into darkness. The team followed the stairs down into a forgotten chamber. The room's upper walls bore faded Byzantine-era Christian symbols, small carved crosses, painted plaster with faint Greek inscriptions, niches that once might have held oil lamps or icons. Clearly, this space had served as a place of Christian worship sometime in the 4th or 5th century CE, but when researchers examined the floor and the lower walls, they realized they were looking at something much older. Beneath the Byzantine additions was an earlier foundation, built with massive, precisely cut limestone blocks. The construction style was immediately recognizable to archaeologists. It matched the ashlar masonry technique characteristic of the First Temple period, the same style found at other confirmed archaeological sites from that era like Megiddo and Hazor. This wasn't just a Byzantine chapel. It was a Byzantine chapel built on top of and incorporating structures from 1,000 years earlier. Someone in the 5th century CE had discovered these ancient chambers and repurposed them for Christian worship. But who had built them originally, and for what purpose? The water beneath engineering a sacred space? As the team continued mapping the underground spaces near the Temple Mount's southern edge, they made another discovery that would prove even more significant: an extensive network of water channels, cisterns, and aqueducts, all carved directly into the bedrock. Water systems aren't unusual in ancient Jerusalem. The city sits on a hilltop in a semi-arid region where water has always been precious. But this system was different. It was too sophisticated, too precisely engineered, and too extensive to be merely practical. When mineral deposits in the waterproof plaster lining the channels were carbon dated, the results shocked the team. 9th to 8th century BCE, firmly in the First Temple period. But the age was less surprising than the system's sophistication. Ancient hydraulic engineering is a specialized field, and experts who examined the channels were genuinely impressed. The system showed evidence of advanced planning, precise gradient control to allow gravity-fed water flow without pumps, overflow mechanisms to prevent flooding, filtration areas to reduce sediment, and interconnected cisterns that could store vast quantities of water during Jerusalem's dry summer months. This wasn't improvised construction. This was institutional engineering, the kind that requires planning, resources, and long-term maintenance. The kind you'd need if you were running a major religious complex that required massive amounts of water for ritual purification, animal sacrifice, and the daily needs of hundreds of priests and thousands of worshippers. When researchers cross-reference the layout of the water system with ancient texts, particularly the books of Chronicles and Kings, they found something remarkable. The system aligned almost perfectly with descriptions of water infrastructure created by Judean kings, particularly King Hezekiah, to support temple operations. One large cistern sat directly beneath what ancient texts identified as the location of the bronze altar, the main sacrificial altar of the First Temple. Residue analysis of material at the bottom of this cistern revealed layers of ash and organic compounds consistent with repeated ritual use. This wasn't just a water storage tank. It appeared to be part of the temple's actual operational infrastructure. The implications were profound. For years, many scholars had assumed that First Temple era worship was relatively simple and unorganized. But this water system told a different story, one of sophisticated logistics, careful planning, and institutional permanence. The people who built this weren't engaged in sporadic ritual practices. They were running a complex, permanent religious operation that required engineering on par with any major ancient civilization. And the water channels led somewhere specific, toward sealed chambers that no one had entered in over 1,000 years. The sealed chamber, a message written in stone, following the water channels and using the ground-penetrating radar data as a guide. Researchers identified a specific area beneath the southern edge of the Temple Mount where multiple lines of evidence converged. The radar showed a sealed chamber. The water system led toward it, and the architectural remains suggested it predated all later construction. Working in the western wall tunnels at a point as close as possible to this location, the team began carefully removing debris from what appeared to be a deliberately blocked passageway. After weeks of painstaking work, they broke through into a small chamber, no more than 12 feet across, carved directly into the bedrock. The air inside was still. Nothing had disturbed the space in an unimaginable span of time. The chamber contained no grand treasures, no golden artifacts, no Ark of the Covenant. But what it did contain would prove equally significant. In the center of the room sat a shallow stone basin, carved from a single piece of limestone. Around it, carefully arranged, were the remains of ancient offerings, fragments of burned incense, small clay oil lamps of a distinctive First Temple style, and a layer of ash that suggested repeated ritual use. But it was the basin itself that stopped the team cold. Carved into its side, worn but still legible, was an inscription in Paleo-Hebrew, the ancient script used during the First Temple period. The inscription read, "He who dwells here, his spirit never leaves." For anyone familiar with ancient Jewish theology, the significance was immediate. The Shekinah, God's divine presence, was believed to dwell in the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber of the temple. According to tradition, even after the temple's destruction, some believed that presence had never truly departed. The team brought in multiple experts to verify the inscription. Paleographers confirmed the script matched other verified Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions from the 8th to 7th century BCE. Linguistic analysis showed the phrasing was consistent with First Temple period Hebrew. Carbon dating of organic residue in the basin aligned with the inscription's apparent age. The location was equally significant. Based on historical texts and the alignment of the water system, This chamber appeared to be directly beneath what would have been the temple's inner sanctum area, the most sacred zone of the entire complex. This discovery represented something unprecedented: physical, datable evidence from a sealed First Temple era chamber containing ritual objects and an inscription that directly referenced the divine presence believed to dwell in the temple. Not proof of theological claims, but proof that the people of that era believed those claims deeply enough to carve them in stone and seal them away for eternity. The response: when evidence meets faith and politics, news of the discoveries has spread through academic circles, religious communities, and political channels in ways both expected and surprising. Unlike Hollywood-style archaeological revelations, there was no grand press conference, no splashy announcement. Instead, the information has emerged gradually through journal articles, conference presentations, and careful scholarly discussion. The reaction has been complex. Among archaeologists and biblical scholars, the finds have sparked intense debate. Some see them as game-changing evidence that confirms the historical basis of biblical accounts. Others urge caution, noting that proving a temple existed doesn't prove specific religious claims about what happened there. The debates are technical, detailed, and ongoing. Religious leaders across all three Abrahamic faiths have responded with a mixture of fascination and concern. Some Jewish scholars see the discoveries as validation of ancient traditions, while others, particularly among Orthodox communities, express worry about any disturbance of potentially sacred spaces. Muslim authorities have largely maintained that the finds don't change the Islamic claim to the site or negate the sanctity of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Christian groups have shown interest, particularly in how the discoveries might relate to the world Jesus knew. Politically, the finds have added new dimensions to an already complex situation. The question of who has the right to explore, study, and interpret what lies beneath the Temple Mount remains unresolved and deeply contentious. Israeli officials have been cautious, aware that any move that appears to threaten the status quo could trigger violence. Palestinian and Jordanian authorities have expressed concern about the implications of archaeological findings that might support Jewish historical claims to the site. What's perhaps most striking is what hasn't happened. Despite discoveries that would, in any other context, be considered among the most significant archaeological finds of the century, there has been no change in access to the Temple Mount itself. The site remains closed to excavation. The surface remains unchanged. The political and religious sensitivities remain as acute as ever. What lies ahead, the questions that remain, the discoveries beneath and around the Temple Mount have answered some questions while raising countless others. If sophisticated First Temple-era structures, water systems, and ritual spaces exist beneath the mount, what else might be there? How much of the biblical descriptions of the temple's size, grandeur, and operational complexity might be based on actual historical reality? Modern technology continues to improve. Ground-penetrating radar becomes more sophisticated each year. New methods of non-invasive analysis are being developed. Remote sensing, chemical analysis of trace materials, and advanced computer modeling all offer ways to learn more about what lies beneath without disturbing the surface. Some researchers have proposed using muon tomography, the same particle imaging technique that discovered hidden voids in Egypt's Great Pyramid, to create detailed three-dimensional maps of everything beneath the Temple Mount without digging a single centimeter. The technology exists. The question is whether the political and religious climate will ever permit its use. There are also deeper questions about what these discoveries mean for how we understand the relationship between archaeology, history, and faith. For some, physical evidence that ancient texts describe real places and real people strengthens religious belief. For others, reducing sacred traditions to archaeological facts misses the point of what makes them sacred in the first place. What is certain is that the Temple Mount continues to guard its secrets carefully. What has been discovered so far may be just the smallest fraction of what remains hidden. The sealed chambers, the water systems, the ritual objects all point to something larger, a complex, sophisticated religious center that operated for centuries at the very heart of ancient Jerusalem. The Temple Mount has stood for millennia as a symbol of faith, conflict, and human longing for connection with the divine. What lies beneath its ancient stones has been the subject of speculation, legend, and scholarly debate for generations. Now, through a combination of accidental exposure and technological innovation, we are beginning to glimpse what previous generations could only imagine. The discoveries emerging from beneath the Temple Mount don't resolve the theological questions that have surrounded this place for thousands of years. They don't determine which religious tradition has the right to claim it. They don't predict the future of Jerusalem or the Middle East. What they do offer is something perhaps
The
more
standard is
profound,
not certainty.
evidence that the faith of
It is
ancient peoples
convergence.
was grounded in real
The
places,
indirect nature
real
of-
structures, and real practices, that the stories passed down through generations, whether in the Hebrew Bible, the Quran, or Christian scripture, are connected to actual historical realities, that beneath the layers of conflict and competing claims lies a shared human story of seeking the sacred. The Temple Mount remains, as it has always been, a place of mystery, but it is a mystery we are slowly, carefully beginning to understand. What other secrets lie beneath those ancient stones? What messages from the past remain sealed in chambers we have not yet found? The answers, like the mount itself, remain just beyond our reach, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. What are your thoughts on these discoveries? How do you think they should shape our understanding of this ancient and sacred place? The conversation continues, as it has for thousands of years, at the intersection of faith, history, and the enduring human desire to uncover truth. Thank you for joining this journey into one of archaeology's most fascinating and sensitive frontiers.